think I need to start by making a momentous announcement. As you know, the true Quran, the pure Quran, never existed in the past. The Prophet Muhammad received the Quran and wrote it with his own hand. And the last surah revealed, surah number 110, was revealed in his Hajj pilgrimage only a few months before he died. This was the last surah revealed. The last surah revealed in Medina was surah number 9. So the Prophet had the Quran written in his own hand in the chronological sequence, with instructions on the side saying where every piece goes. That's all the Prophet had. It was not the Quran that God intended for the world. 19 years later, during the era of Osman, Islam had gone to Syria and Iraq and Egypt, and Osman wanted to make copies to send to those new Muslims, new countries. So he appointed a committee to carry out the Prophet's, God's instructions. Take that original copy. By that time it was with the Prophet's wife Hafsa, Omar's daughter. Osman sent for it and he gave it to the committee to carry out the instructions. This goes here, this piece goes here, and put the Quran in the order that God intends for the world. And I think you know the rest of the story, where when they finished and they came to the last surah revealed in Medina, surah 9, someone suggested to add a couple of verses to honor the Prophet. So they committed that big crime that caused the war between Ali and Osman, and then the war against Ali and his family, the Prophet's family, that ended with the eradication of the Prophet's family in Karbala. And the winners were the Umayyads, who put the two verses in the Quran. So the version that came to us about the war and the history of the Quran is the version of those so-called winners. They thought they won the war. So the announcement I want to make is that this is the last time we use this. As of next week, we'll use the new translation. This is the announcement. So it will not be in a book form yet, but you will be handed the new translation to study. This is the last time we use this, so it's a historical book. But the new translation is going to come out. It's going to be hardcover. It's going to be luxurious with you see the page there. This is a very hazy cover. It's not a good one, but it's going to be sharp and it'll be in gold stamp. The cover itself, the hardcover outside, will be dark blue, and it will be for the first time in history the pure Quran in Arabic and in English. So, as you know, some of you read the small booklet about the two verses, and I mentioned in it the reasons why God did not let those people have the pure Quran, because they simply did not deserve it. Because only 19 years after the Prophet's death, they corrupted the religion. They started to worship Muhammad against his will, in the same way the Christians do with Jesus. They're all humans. The Christians are humans and the Muslims are humans, and both of them fell for the trap of Satan, and they started to idolize the Prophet against his will. They invented an adhan that does not have the name of God alone. The prayer became distorted, did not have the name of God alone. And just to make a long story short, they did not deserve the pure Quran. Now there are people who devote their worship to God alone, and they uphold the Quran alone, and these are the true Muslims. The true Muslims will have the true Quran. And this is really a historical historical event. As you know, the famous statement in the Quran is that the month of Ramadan is when the Quran was revealed. And this is exactly when the Quran is going to be completed and will be purified and it's going to come out, going to be sent to the press in Ramadan, inshallah. And I know you believe me when I tell you that I didn't plan it this way. It was not planned this way. As a matter of fact, I was slowed down so many times, I was frustrated due to my ignorance. I shouldn't be frustrated. I should know that God is arranging the time. And all these delays were designed so that the pure Quran will come out in Ramadan. So I'm glad to share this with you. Now we go to our teacher, Catherine, and we'll start at Surah 62.
We're on page 397. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Glorifying God is everything in the heavens and the earth. He is the King, sacred, the Almighty, the Most Wise. He is the one who raised among the Gentiles a messenger to recite his revelations for them, sanctify them, and teach them the scripture and wisdom. Before this they had gone astray. Others among them refused to join. He is the Almighty, the Wise. This is God's grace. He bestows it upon whomever he wills. God possesses unlimited grace. The example of those who were given the Torah, then failed to study it, is that of a donkey carrying great works of literature. Miserable indeed is the example of those who reject God's revelations. God never guides the wicked people. Say, O you who are Jewish, if you claim that you are God's chosen to the exclusion of all other people, then you should long for death if you are truthful. They never long for it because of what their hands have committed. God is fully aware of the wicked. Say, the death that you flee from will inevitably catch up with you. Then you will be turned over to the knower of all secrets and declarations. He will inform you of everything you did. Glorifying God is everything in the heavens and the earth. He is the King, the sacred, the Almighty, the Most Wise. If we take that thought through all of our day, God will be our God all day long. Because everywhere we look and everything we do, everything we hear, everything we see is submitting to God, including our bodies, our minds, and our hearts. Donna said recently that we should strive to be like the animals and the rocks and the mountains and the trees. And when she said that, I agreed with her. This is going to sound funny. I've always been fascinated by rocks, mountains. And when I was in Ireland, alhamdulillah, for a short period of time, I was fascinated even more because the people live on a rock. They have to carry dirt and put it between rock crevices to grow food, and then it blows away, and they have to repeat the process again. The rocks remain, and the people go. They've worked out a compromise with God, as it were, and they have, in the example of the rocks around them, the mountains and the boulders, what they should be striving to be like, yet steadfast as the rocks and the trees and the animals that never change.
We have a pit rock?
No.
You missed that.
No. They're all pit rocks. I said it was going to sound funny. It's part of the reason that I'm comfortable in Tucson, too, I have to say that. And green things and all living things. We have so many reminders around us that there's no way that we could ever say that we did not know that there was one God and that all things submitted to God. He is the one who raised the Gentiles a messenger to recite his revelations for them. Before this they had gone astray. This is incredible mercy from God. He did not have to do this for us. We blew it the first time around. We just totally blew it. We missed. And this is a time when close is only good in horseshoes. This is a real big miss. God has no reason to do anything for us. He doesn't need us for anything. He doesn't need us to know him. He doesn't need that. And yet, he sends messengers, consistently sends messengers spends 1,400 years purifying his final message. He didn't have to do that. I mean, he gave it once. Why spend 1,400 years sending even more messengers and purifying the message? For the very few who hear it. Incredible mercy. God just did not have to do this for us. We live in a world where not too many people are given second chances. You either pull your own weight or you're jettisoned like so much luggage or baggage. That's not God's pattern. Not only are we given one chance, but multiple chances throughout our lives to come to the truth. And so many messengers and so many messengers in so many ways. The mercy that is described in the next verse as unlimited is beyond anything that we can understand. We have limits. We can give people multiple chances, but at some point we're going to turn around and not give them another chance, and we're going to walk away. But God doesn't leave that person. We do. God doesn't leave that person. Or us in those times. We cannot imagine what unlimited grace or mercy is. And I don't think we will until we die. And we know the extent of hell and heaven and love and mercy and peace that waits for us. Others among them refused to join. This is verse 3. He is the Almighty, the wise. There's a verse, and this one I do know, Lisa. If 81:29, and you don't have to turn to it, I'll read it. It says, "Whatever you will is in accordance with the will of God, Lord of the universe." For some time, the realization that whatever thoughts I had were not my own has been a mind-boggler for me. The only thing I do is choose God alone. After that, this is an illusion, as I've spoken of before, including the illusion that I did something, that I thought something, that I had this idea. As Rashad said, God arranges everything, including the thoughts in our minds. Those of us who are going to invent some new and exciting tool to make a job easier, when we do that and we discuss it with those fellow people, fellow colleagues, and say, look what you thought of, look what I thought of, look what it will do. Never a thought that God did that. You didn't do that. God put the thought for the invention in your mind and brought it to reality. Every thought we have is in accordance with God's will, whether we're believers or not. God tailors each of our lives and experiences according to our original decision before we came. So that verse, which pops up as I read through so much of the Quran, is a constant reminder for me that whatever I will is according to the will of God, meaning I don't do it, I don't think it. This is God's grace. He bestows it upon whomever He wills. God possesses unlimited grace. The example of those who were given the Torah then failed to study it. I often wish when I'm talking to people that I could remember funny jokes that I've heard, or these really great lines from the comedies on television. There are some really funny lines, and I don't have that kind of mind. This is one of those lines that I do remember, thank God. A donkey carrying great works of literature. There's another verse in Quran that refers to the ugliest voice being that of the donkey, which I remembered when I was reading this. I just don't know where it is. The Quran is of no use to a disbeliever. It's totally sealed from them, from their understanding. They won't understand it. They can read it. They can read the concrete words, and they're very simple. They're attainable and understandable by everyone. And they don't see or hear what they just read. When you ask them, what does that mean? Instead of ABC, you'll get some foreign language back that has no relationship to what people have read. God prevents Quran and the truth from getting to those people who are not believers. They are like donkeys carrying great works of literature. Or on the next page, where the metaphor of a wooden log is used, incapable of understanding. On the other hand, a donkey submits to God totally, absolutely, totally, and doesn't have need of a great work of literature. The donkey's already there. So it's an interesting group of words, a donkey carrying great works of literature. And sometimes I feel like that when I'm trying to work on something new or hard or something that has been a part of me that needs to be purified. I feel like a donkey a lot of the time. I don't feel like I'm going anywhere, and I'm sitting down in the middle of the road. So this verse created a whole bunch of pictures for me when I read it. I thought it was wonderful. Miserable indeed is the example of those who reject God's revelations. God never guides the wicked people. Again, whatever we will is according to the will of God. If we choose not to be guided, we won't be guided. God gives us exactly what we want. We get impatient. We want it now. We want it next week. But God gives us what we need, in what form we need, when we need it, including the wicked people who reject God. They won't be able to say anything on the day of resurrection. Then they won't have to. Verse 6, O you who are Jewish, if you claim that you are God's chosen to the exclusion of all others, then you should long for death. They never long for it because of what their hands are committed. God is fully aware of the wicked. You don't have to be Jewish. There are lots of people who seem to feel that they're chosen for one thing or another. We all know the history of the Jewish people, but there are so many others. God is aware of each and every one of them who lives their lives according to their ego and their personal needs, which they focus on. And they really don't believe that God is going to do what God says, that there will be a day of resurrection, and that they will be held accountable. So for those people who put themselves above other people, and those people who put themselves ahead of other people, I pray to God I'm not behind them on the day of resurrection. All of us are in the same boat. We're all responsible for our own necks, no matter whether we're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or anything else. And I'm not sure that I can say right now that I long for death. I think I need a lot more work. Verse 8 says, the death that you flee from will inevitably catch up with you. And then you'll be turned over to the knower of all secrets and declarations. He will inform you of everything you did. I read a book a long while ago, when my children were little. It was about one of those pop psychiatry kinds of things, psychology types. It's about child psychology, and about sibling rivalry, and about children who fight with each other and drive parents crazy because they argue over everything and nothing. And the only thing I got out of this hundreds of pages of book was a really cute scenario about these kids squabbling in a room and the din being so loud that no one could think. And the man suggested that the parent go to the door of the room. Of course, the kids would not notice that because they would be involved in their fight, and simply say, I saw that, and wait. Because both children, or all children, would then turn around and look up at the parent and begin to spill out at once, 3 voices at once. What happened? Well, he did this to me. No, he did that to me. And if you just waited for 5 minutes, you'd have the whole story. And you'd be able to put it in the right order and make a judgment that would be correct. And when I read this verse, then you will be turned over to the knower of all secrets and declarations, I see it like that. We don't know when our death is going to come. And when it comes, the Quran tells us many of us won't even know that we've died. We'll wake and be with God, without God. And I see God standing there saying, I saw that, and I don't have to say anything, because He did see that. And that's not an uncomfortable feeling. That's a very comfortable feeling, to know that God is always with me, that God sees my mistakes and works on me to correct those mistakes, and that the things that I may have forgotten about, I'll be reminded about, hopefully in this world, and forgiven for in the next. Does anybody have any comments or questions or up to?
See, they carried it a bit too far. God did choose them and gave them the scripture, saved them from Egypt, split the sea for them. So in that sense they were chosen, they were God's chosen. But they made it exclusive. Also, they exaggerated it way beyond reason. First they were God's chosen, then they became almost equal to God, you know, they had hands around his shoulder and walk around like friends. Then God became like a child, subhanAllah, God be glorified. In Rabbi Kushner's book, where he talks as if God is a child. He says, it's okay, we forgive you. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. He said, are you ready to forgive God for what he did to you because of his inability? You know, just your hair will stand up if I tell you what he likes. And this is, I mean, the extreme arrogance of the majority of them. So this is what happened to the distortion of the concept of being God's chosen. They distorted it and exaggerated it too much. We have the synagogue, they send their kids here maybe once a year to talk. And one time the sign out there was happiness is submission to God. And I was talking to those Jewish children here, and I was telling them that anyone who submits to God is a submitter, regardless of the name Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or what. So one of the teachers objected, we do not submit to anybody. They said, not even to God, not even to God. Yeah. So this is almost typical of the majority. It just tells us that the majority of Jews, the majority of Christians, the majority of Muslims have been tricked by Satan. So this verse here, 6, is talking about the distortion of God's choosing. So the key word will be to the exclusion of all others. And also to make it like it's guaranteed. It doesn't matter what they do. That's why God says, why to long for death? And like Catherine said, we don't long for death because we know that the longer we worship God, the greater, the bigger, the more developed is our soul. And also, we're not that arrogant. You have to be really arrogant to long for death. But if you feel that you need to develop and grow your soul, that you need to atone for past sins, and you want to make up for the past and things like that, you will not long for death. Yes. Yeah, they do. Yeah, they actually a lot of them do think that automatically, Muhammad will take the Arabs out of hell, which is a wrong concept. It's the exact opposite. When you talk about sibling rivalry, I guess these people didn't know about Apame and Nal. These two go to the bathroom together. You've seen it, right? I mean, they destroy all concept of sibling rivalry. Actually, I have noticed it with the Iranians a lot. People from I don't know what it is, but maybe
not girls in general.
Not girls in general. No. I'm not talking about going to the bathroom together. I'm talking about no rivalry, and they don't fight.
They never fight.
No.
I'm just giving an example of how much we
Yeah, right.
And I've seen this many, quite often. It's genuine. It's not only here, right? You don't act. You like this at home, right?
Yeah,
see?
Each other every day.
Any other questions or curious?
It's wicked at the end of the verse 7. Therefore indicates to the Sufi indicates the Jewish,
Mhm.
Jews. It refers to the verse 6, but as you mentioned, there are some Muslims, some Christians. Therefore, this wicked will also be general to all people.
Right.
Even if you think they are chosen.
Right. See, here we don't say we're the only ones. We raise that verse in Surah 2, verse number 62. It says that anyone who worships God alone is our brother or sister, regardless of what they call themselves. Because our objective is worshiping God alone. And anyone who does that, we love them and respect them for it. So this is actually a very, very important criteria. If you go any place,
Concept of Tawheed.
right. Back to Catherine, and number 9. Yeah.
How about if a person is a Christian and he worships God alone,
Yes.
and he does certain things that he's not supposed to do, like, he work and doesn't pray 5 times a day, do you
No.
consider that to be,
Did he read the Quran?
excuse me?
Did he read the Quran?
Him?
Yeah.
No.
Right. But it's all right.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Goes to heaven. It's 262. He worships God alone. You see that person, if he comes across the Quran, he will agree with it wholeheartedly. He'll find nothing objectionable. Absolutely. I mean, the verse 62 names Christians by name, Jews, Christians. It then says anyone who worships God alone and believes in the hereafter, the day of judgment, and is righteous, will make it to heaven. But
There were some laws that specifically say that God chose to make us different congregations, and there are different rules for different
Yes.
congregations, and everyone's to follow their own rules.
548, yes.
What those rules, are they in contrast with the whole concept?
For example,
I don't understand exactly what you meant.
I'll explain it to you. You can be a Jew if you want to and go to heaven. But if you decide to be a Jew, you have to follow the Jewish law. You have to honor the Sabbath. On Saturday, you don't work, you don't answer the telephone, you don't do this. You spend the day worshiping God. You follow their diet system according to the Torah. You follow their laws. You pray 3 times a day. You do the Jewish laws. You worship God alone. But now that you've seen the Quran and the completion of the message, it will not be very smart to go back in time, because God, the scripture, the message from God evolved with the human being. But the Quran tells you that anyone who's following either one of these systems, the divinely revealed systems, is all right.
But didn't you mention verse 62 that you have to believe in the concept of Tawheed and hereafter?
Yes. Yes.
As I understand the laws of Judaism, even though those who kept kosher and dairy and non-dairy and all those Sabbath and all 9 yards, they don't accept, they don't believe in the hereafter.
No, they're not Jewish then.
So
Just
therefore,
believers.
we are actually telling, in another word, we are telling them what the
No,
laws are.
not the Torah. God tells them. God is telling them. If they do not believe in the hereafter, they don't follow the Torah, and they're not Jewish. Just like the Muslims who follow Hadith and Sunnah, they don't believe in the hereafter according to the Quranic criteria. They're not Muslims. See, when I say Jewish, I mean Jewish. When I say Christian, I mean Christian. When I say Muslim, I mean Muslim. So
But the definition...
a Christian who does not believe in the hereafter, heaven and hell, is not a Christian. Because he's not following what Jesus said. And the Jew who does not believe in the hereafter is not following the Torah or what Moses said.
So you can't, in the same sense you can't, I guess, Christianity, you can't define it as divine. So that you have to define Christianity as somebody who follows what Jesus taught,
Exactly.
rather than Christianity as it exists.
But by
Because
definition,
Christianity, like you said, okay, I said, okay, I want to be a Christian, they can drink, they can do work, that's easier. I'm going to be a Christian. Well, you can't do that because you go to church operates and functions around, the worship of the Trinity, God, Jesus, and the
That's not
Father.
Christianity.
But as it exists
That's actually
today,
Paulism.
That's an example.
No, see,
That's what
by
it is.
definition, a Christian is one who follows Christ. The so-called Christianity today is really Paulism. It's not Christianity.
Yeah, I've read that.
We know.
But when you look at, is there a Jewish Christianity in existence today?
Sure. Yeah. The Christians who do not believe in the message of God, the Christians, yes. Actually, are great Christians.
In Judaism also, you have a...
Yes. Yes, there's Jews.
Orthodox,
All kinds. There are Jews of all kinds. There are Orthodox Jews, Reform Jews, conservative Jews who are true Muslims.
See, that's kind of funny because it's all typed. So you can consider everybody in this room a Christian because Jesus preached to follow God alone. So then we can say we're Christian.
Sure.
So you get, it's
And religion. And that religion is worshipping God alone. This one religion is practiced by Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, but it is one religion.
but it is evolving.
Well, the message evolved with the people, with the human race. No, there's no conflict at all. If you read the Bible, the Torah, read Deuteronomy, it's beautiful, just like the Quran. Read the Psalms, like the Quran, Isaiah, Proverbs. Read the Bible, you'll find it identical. Really, the written scripture started with the Torah. Okay? Then we have after this the Psalms and Isaiah and Solomon, Proverbs, which is Solomon's book. And they're all identical with the Quran. There is no conflict at all. Where is the conflict? Give me an example of conflict.
I think if it is more information in Quran than was in Torah in Christian Bible, is going to be helpful. Because we are saying we are stretching the knowledge to and limited that knowledge to Quran. This is one criteria, as I see it. And the other fellow, which is a Christian, is limited all the way to their Bible and ignores the rest. Don't you see the conflict?
But where's the conflict?
I just told you.
Do they all worship God alone?
And well, at the beginning I said, if this is more, it supersedes other books,
Right.
there has to be I see it, and I'm sorry, I just explained it the way I could. I think there is a conflict there.
No, okay.
Unless you tell me.
There's no conflict at all. All of them advocate the worship of God alone, and all of them give you a system to develop your soul.
Okay, the basics are the same. Three religion, they all worship God and God alone.
Right.
And
That's it.
But that is not enough, I think.
That's it. That's enough.
If
That's
that
the whole
was
thing.
enough, well, if that was enough, what was the reason of three big religion?
Because of God's mercy.
And then also,
It's verse 2.
Yeah.
He is the one who raised among the Gentiles a messenger to recite his revelation for them, sanctify them, and teach them the scripture and wisdom. Gentiles are the people who did not have a scripture. God did not want to leave them alone. Leave them lost. Wanted to guide them.
Also that God knew that the other scriptures were touched by human beings that were changed or altered, and then we got the Quran, which was never, the human being could never touch it,
Never distorted.
and it was preserved, and it just gave the Arabs a different set of guidelines that it gave Jews and Christians, and that's all that it is. But the one that why it came after everything else is that God knew that this one was never going to be touched.
Okay, actually, this is the chicken and the egg. God permitted the distortion of the other scriptures because this is the one that is going to be in the whole world about 50 years from now. The others will be history. But this is the only scripture that is this is the untouched. This is God's complete message to be given to the vast majority of the human race. I mean, even 50 years from now, we'll still have 65 billion people coming to use this as their message. This is God's message to come to supersede and take the place of all the others.
Then I guess if God then permitted those scriptures to be such the way they were, it still preserves the correct message, and it's a test for those people to get the right information out of it. And some do, some really see the conflict. So it's a test.
Yeah, exactly. But it is all the scriptures are supposed to vanish. This is why we have these overwhelming physical proofs that will simply take over the world, the whole world. Just give the world 50 years from now, maybe less.
But do you really think it will vanish, or Judaism, Christianity will vanish within 50 years? Isn't that wishful thinking?
This is God's law. He said we're going to come. If we go look at page 396, right there in front of you, verse 9. He's the one who sent his messenger with the guidance and the religion of truth to make it prevail over all religions. This is God's law. It is not wishful thinking.
That indicates to this date also. That I'm saying we put the time 50 years. Right?
Yes.
What I'm saying is this doesn't mention anything about 50 years. As I see it. And I think it will remain with us as mankind until the end of the life. Judaism and Christianity, it has been with us and it will.
Well, Islam would be the dominant, like America would be a Muslim country, if you want to look at it this way. It will no longer be a Judeo-Christian country. It will be a Muslim country. And this is God's law. I mean, today, can you call America a Muslim country? Okay, 50 years from now, America will be a Muslim country.
Doesn't this
And it's not wishful thinking. Huh?
You're actually saying something that is based on your desire.
No, it is not. Apparently, you don't know the message, so I suggest that you read the Miracle of Quran and look at it carefully. Then you'll agree with me.
It says 50 years. Is that
Maximum 50 years. Probably be less than that. Be more like 20 years. These things are going to happen very fast in the next 20 years. But I'm giving myself a long time just to be careful. Mahmoud? Yes. It's 19 times 19 times 32. Hamid?
No, I was just saying, 20 years or 50 years, whatever it is, it's an estimate that hopefully, inshallah, by this time, we'll realize the real message about the truth.
Yes, things are going to happen very fast, folks.
So it is estimated. It is not
Like I said, 50 years is maximum, but it's most probably 20 years. In your lifetime.
It's
Inshallah.
not estimate, sir. It's not. You just put the
Hamid, do you know that the sun will rise tomorrow?
yeah,
How? How do you know that?
because probably you see up to now it's there every day.
Right, because there are certain signs that indicate. See, look at the clock. It is 8:15, and 12 hours from now it will be 8:15 in the morning. So you know that the sun will come. This is a sign that the sunrise is approaching. And the same with if you read the Miracle of Quran and understand it, you will know that this country will be Muslim within 20 to 50 years. And I showed you it is God's law. I have it to be in front of you. 61 verse 9. This is a verse that is repeated 3 times in the Quran. Back to Catherine, we're taking the whole thing from her. Verse 9.
O you who believe, when the Salat prayer is announced on Friday, you shall hasten to the commemoration of God and leave all business. This is better for you if you only knew. Once the Salat prayer is finished, you shall spread through the land seeking God's bounties and continue to commemorate God frequently, that you may succeed. Yet when they see business or entertainment, they rush to it and leave you standing. Say, what God possesses is far better than the entertainment and the business. God is the best provider. I think most of you know that I am employed in a crisis center, and mashallah, I haven't missed a Friday, Jummah, since going to work there. Actually, that coincided with a commitment on my part not to miss. And you can't organize crises. As you all know, they just kind of fall out of the sky, and every Friday, thank God, I've been able to walk out of there. And no one calls me back, and the building is still standing when I get back there, and no one says anything. It's very important that we understand how important it is that we come and join together on Fridays. There is nothing that should keep us from that. What I wrote in the margin, and I don't know when it was I wrote it, but I wrote in the margin of those 3 verses, illusion and unreal, and we need to leave it as easily as we turn off the television, because this is what's real. Coming together at Jummah and to study Quran and be with believers is real. The rest of the world we live in is the illusion that God created to sustain us and guide us and teach us and extend His mercy to us. But it's set up entirely for us. It's like some giant playground. Some people get injured on the playground and some people have a wonderful time. But it is an illusion. And this is the real thing. There's nothing that should keep us from this. Absolutely nothing. Does anyone have any comments on the last 3 verses?
How would you have a group of people meet in your house?
Well, if for some reason, let's say for instance, in a place with less than one worship God, then it seems to me you could apply that by just having someone who does. I don't know.
What does it say? Okay, what is Friday in Arabic? And Jummah means what? Right, a group of people. Yeah.
Even 2 people have a hospital.
Yeah. Friday came from Abraham, since the time of Abraham. Yeah. Yeah. That's what it means. What do you mean came first? I'll talk about 2 things. What are the 2 things? Is there a first and second in your mind? Just want to understand your question. You said which came first? Okay, what do you have in mind when you say which came first? Which and which? What and what?
The word for Friday, which means coming together, is that comes after, that comes as a result of the fact that would say that people came together. Because, I mean, it was called, the name, the word Friday has always been that there, even
No.
before the time.
No. It hasn't always been that. There was a time when there was no names of the weekdays, like the Sabbath.
So, but it
Yom
dates
Sabbath.
back to Abraham. Was there a woman on
Yeah,
before Muhammad?
sure. Yeah, we were having Friday prayers before Muhammad. We didn't know that all the practices of Islam came through Abraham. Yeah. All all the practice came from Abraham. Look at 16:123 will tell you.
But it wasn't different prayer at the time of Abraham.
No.
It's five times prayer.
Exactly the same, yeah.
It's exactly the same.
Yep.
And you think prayer caused, I think your question was this way. If you want to learn science, you go to university to learn it, or you want to learn it, and then university is just a tool. I think the prayer is important, and for that purpose you go to mosque, or you have to go to mosque in order to pray.
Okay.
That was a question. Which comes first? You can pray.
No, that's not.
Doesn't matter.
That was not the question. That was the one.
The Arab isn't whether it was your call for Jumu'ah prayer was in Arabic. I thought it was about the Persian translation says, but your call for prayer. Because you have
That's
it
wrong.
in your
No, that's wrong. There's no when you're called. That's not in Arabic. It's when,
It's announced.
yeah, when the salat is announced. There's no you are called in Arabic. It's a passive. I don't know what the English grammar would be. It's a passive statement. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say when you are called. Back to Catherine and the next surah. Let me emphasize.
So your answer is yes, and it's obligatory?
Absolutely, this is what I was going to say now. It is unfortunate that my generation, for example, in Iran, they grew up with the lack of the Friday prayer. And it is not as firmly implanted in them to do the Friday prayer until Khomeini revolution came. Then they started to do the Friday prayer. And I found it disastrous from my observations. There are many fortunate people like the Sabahis and the Mu'inis. They came to the Friday prayer readily. God is guiding them, and they did it easily. But it was not easy for many people to do the Friday prayer, and I found it disastrous for them. Just the Friday prayer, because they didn't do it, they caused their dropout. I mean, I know that. I'm just trying to emphasize the extreme importance of the Friday prayer. I mean, God is saying here, and drop all business. It is very important, and it says this is better for you. If you are waiting for somebody to sign a deal with you that will give you $10 million, and that is at the time of the prayer, God is telling you, go to the Friday prayer and leave those $10 million, and it will be better for you. Because God will give you $20 million. It is very important, and it is difficult for, if we grow up, like the last generations in Iran, if they grow up without the obligatory Friday prayer, it becomes more difficult to adapt to the Friday prayer, but at the same time, the reward is also doubled. It actually multiplied many-fold for doing that. Reward.
I have been to other Middle East countries, but I imagine it's more or less the same. I have, with this verse, I have the personal experience in Turkey, and generally women do not go to Friday prayer. And I asked one imam over there, and I said, why don't the women go to the Friday prayer? And he told me that because of the certain hadith that it was decreed that the women should go. And then when I mentioned this verse, he couldn't say anything.
Yeah. It doesn't say, oh, you believing men.
It says, oh, you believe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it addresses both the men and the women. So I guess, but they had the famous hadith that the women are going to hell or something like that. So I think they overruled that. Maybe they say, oh, you men. Or something like that. So only men are allowed to go to the mosque.
There's a hadith that says that women should not go to the Friday prayer, and the next hadith says that women are deficient in religion because they don't go to the Friday prayer. You know? I mean, what a catch-22.
In the article that was in the newspaper, they said that it's obligatory for the men to go, but it's optional for the women to go.
In the paper, even the Islamic Center, no, they said we discouraged. So we don't want women to go because they follow hadith. But obviously here, verse 9 says, "Oh, you who believe." So it doesn't say men or women. This is an obligatory duty for men and women. It's very, very important.
Why is it important? Why is it emphasized? You said the importance of that.
Because it's a commandment. This is a commandment from God. It says, "Oh, you who believe, when the Salat prayer is announced on Friday, you shall hasten to commemorate God and leave all business." This is a commandment from God.
Well, I can say a few reasons for why is that particular day, that Friday. I think it is end of the week, and therefore you can administrate the khutbah.
There's no excuse.
Well,
Sorry.
so you can actually go through the problems of the whole week and then Imam ask the problems and then try to solve it within the community.
That's not the purpose. The purpose is not solving problems. The purpose is to commemorate God
But for the well-being.
in a group of people.
So I think,
That's the purpose.
I have a comment here.
Yeah.
So I think as a Muslim it's very important to us to ask ourselves any particular action that Muslims are doing. They must excuse them why they are doing it. And
That's fine.
why they are doing where, particular place, and also why they are doing when.
Right.
It's very important. Going back to Juma prayer, emphasizing why they are, I guess I would say in most of the Islamic countries, why they end of the week.
You can make Wednesday the end of the week if you want to.
There's a khutbah over here. As you know, we have a khutbah going on in the school. And so in those khutbah, the problems of the Muslim society and the dangers that Muslim societies and countries are being faced from the other non-believer and non-Muslim societies are to be discussed because majority of the people they are together and then we all live in a society that pays a great respect to all people, the mass of the people, the number of the people, and these mass of the people are the ones that can move ahead and can do revolutions and bring to Islam to the societies. Particularly, I would say one of the guests that I'm guessing would be to discuss the problems, discuss the transaction, discuss
Yeah, this happens automatically. If you carry out the commandment, this one will happen automatically. That's exactly the purpose of the Friday prayer. We will get together and we know each
not
other.
only get together and pray to God, but you can pray to God at our home, one person at a time. But when they're in a place there's 100,000 people in person.
So you agree with the Friday prayer that it is important, right?
Yes, it is.
That's good.
But
We
there
agree.
There must be accepted, reason why Friday.
Yes.
And you can only go on Friday and pray and don't talk about other problems. But
If you take the concept away, word is anti-Islam, it's not, you shouldn't go. If the Imam is just talking nonsense, BSing, you better stay home.
Then how will you change the situation if you stay at
We're
home?
not going there for sure.
you have to talk about the situation. You have to discuss the whole problem. Pray to God.
So you just like I was just mentioning,
What if the Imam is giving fantastic lessons that will save your life? Why do you assume the negative?
The Imam cannot give us a fantastic lesson. We discussed it. We have shura there. You have lots of people from different societies, from different religions, discuss the problem. You see what has happened to you from Shamba to Jum'ah, from Saturday to Jum'ah. What are the problems? What are the economic problems, political problems, social problems, cultural problems?
Yeah.
And all these problems must be discussed in the Jum'ah prayer.
Yeah.
The philosophy of having a Jum'ah prayer.
I agree with you.
The Juma prayer could be on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or on Wednesday, then you can discuss everything that happened last Wednesday, or Thursday.
Wednesday's not a holiday.
You know what, I think that no matter what day it was, it's still called in Arabic, Salah. Because like you said, that just makes really sense, because the name itself preserves that, no matter what day of the week it calls on. In other languages, in Arabic, you just
I don't think anybody's objecting to do the Friday prayer on Friday.
No, but, I mean, the idea is that Friday is because that allows you to discuss everything between Saturday and Friday.
Well, people are free to say what they want.
But Friday you're emotionally ready, you don't have any classes, you don't have any work to do, you are all off, business like a Saturday over here. Why on Saturday they were ready to do the party?
But in a Muslim country, if the day of gathering together were on a Wednesday, everything would just be adjusted. All the companies would be closed.
Oh, Martha, please, let's not discuss nonsense here. I mean, not you, Liz, just, we can go on discussing the rain talk. Let's go back to Catherine and Surah 63. We can make an assumption and go on discussing it, you know. What if the sky is green? You know, let's discuss that. 63.
The hypocrites. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. The hypocrites come to you and say, we bear witness that you are the messenger of God. God knows that you are his messenger, and God bears witness that the hypocrites are liars. They use their oaths to deceive and to repel others from the path of God. Evil indeed is what they do. They have believed, then disbelieved. Consequently, their hearts were sealed, and consequently, they cannot understand. When you see them, you may be impressed by their appearance, and when they speak, you hear their voice. But they are like wooden logs. They think that every cry is intended against them. Beware of them. God curses them, for they have deviated. When they are told, come, let the messenger of God ask forgiveness for you, they turn their heads away, repulsed by their arrogance. Whether you ask forgiveness for them or do not ask forgiveness for them, God will not forgive them. God does not guide the wicked people. They are the ones who say, don't give any charity to those who follow the messenger of God, that they may abandon him. To God belongs the treasures of the heavens and the earth, but the hypocrites don't understand. They say, if we return to the city, the powerful will displace the weak therefrom. All dignity and power belong to God and to his messenger and the believers, but the hypocrites don't know. Verse 1, the footnote says, even though the hypocrites are uttering a truth, God calls them liars. Teaches us that we must reject all fabrications attributed to the prophet under the name of hadith, even if such hadith narrates a truth. The fabrication of a good hadith is the bait that Satan uses to cover a deadly hook. There are many people who are very talented with words in their individual languages. And how scriptures and hadiths and the oral traditions in the Jewish faith and so on came to be was those human beings who were very talented with words took the truths and elaborated upon them to the point where they became man-made laws, regulations, suggestions, traditions, to the point where those became the truths that people followed as opposed to the real message, which was at the core originally. There is some truth, some veracity to what we hear in all things. The test is to figure out where it is and what it is. If you know what the truth is from the beginning, you can recognize the distortions. Sometimes they're so well done that it's hard to argue with people because you're not as well, you're not as articulate as they are, for instance. Some people are very articulate and very well versed with the word and very good abstract thinkers, if I can use that phrase. And I'm not. I just know what the truth is, thank God. And when it starts to get so complicated that it's hard to find it in what I'm hearing, I have to stop that and I have to say, no, there is a bottom line here. God says, even if there's truth in what we hear mixed in with the distortion, we're to discard all of it because it is a game, and it's Satan's game. It isn't a person's game that's talking to you. It's Satan's game. Satan's out to bring us on those things that we're perhaps not as sure about, not as able to argue about, to get us to go to him and forget God alone. And this is really difficult because this is in the media, this is in the newspapers, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in comedy. It's on street signs. I mean, the distortions are everywhere, and the truth is always buried in there somewhere. It's almost like playing chess, you know. When it's your turn to move, you have to walk very carefully to the next square because there's so much of that stuff all around us. And it's stuff. Don't laugh.
You're looking at something else.
chess and spaghetti, no doubt. Okay. They use their oaths to deceive and to repel others from the path of God. Evil indeed is what they do. They've believed then disbelieved. Consequently, their hearts were sealed and they cannot understand. Once a person has believed and then disbelieved, they're done. God will continue to support that person throughout their life here and give them even the things that they want, but they'll never get to the truth. Once they had it and gave it up, they won't be able to come back. And God is very definite in this verse about that. And then goes on to describe them as if they were wooden logs. And we may be impressed, as I said earlier, by their appearance, by the... Verse 8 says that all dignity and power belong to God, to His messenger, and the believers. But the hypocrites don't know. We are provided for. Everything we need is provided for. So when people who don't understand that plot and scheme to prevent us from getting the things that we're supposed to get, it's totally useless. We get what we're supposed to get from God, not from anyone else. So those schemes and plans to disrupt or disband or fight with don't go anywhere. They're diffused before they ever get off the ground. What they do is keep those people occupied and out of our business while we go about it. Because they're busy doing things that are fruitless. And that's a form of protection for us as well, because we know that we can't be hurt by them. Does anyone have any comments, additions, subtractions on that section?
Abdullah.
When verse 5 says, 6, whether the messenger has forgiveness or not, why you not forgive them? If that's the case, when people ask, why people ask, forgiveness was come by the messenger of God, does God mean that ask something that it doesn't matter whether he has forgiveness?
No, what this means is that God will accept the prayer for forgiveness for the believers, but not for the hypocrites. This is what it's telling us. They are too arrogant anyway, and they don't have the belief in their hearts, so they think it's all nonsense anyway. Pardon?
So it doesn't have anything to do with Shafa'at?
No, it actually proves there is no Shafa'at. Because it's only the believers who will be helped, and the believers are going to heaven anyway. The disbelievers and the hypocrites cannot be helped, so what's the use of Shafa'at? So this is what the Quranic position is. The Quranic position is that every one of us, inshallah, when we go to heaven, will say, please God, I want my mother with me. I love her very much. Okay? And this is Shafa'at. You will say it, I will say it, everybody will say it, inshallah, in heaven. And now this Shafa'ah is useful if the mother is a good person that is already going to heaven. If the mother was not to go to heaven, this Shafa'ah will not do any good, therefore it is really useless. But we will say it anyway, out of emotion. So this is the understanding of Shafa'ah. And this is exactly what these verses are saying. Saying when the messenger asks grace for forgiveness, for it will be accepted for the believers, but not for the hypocrites or the disbelievers. Exactly. Because it's true.
It's our human nature to
Because it
do
is
it.
true. Not because it's something that is, because it's a fact. Yeah. You say? Yes. Anybody can repent. I think this is a point that Catherine raised, but if a person goes back from belief to disbelief, they can always repent and come back to it. There are other verses in the Quran, in Surah 4, verse 137, says, if you can believe, disbelieve, believe, disbelieve, and so on. So the Quran is talking about the period when they are disbelievers.
Just mentioned that God
No, there's no such thing as God cannot. Repeat. Rephrase your question.
I'm just trying to understand what was discussed. You mentioned that God cannot.
No, there's no such thing as God cannot. Okay, now rephrase the question. There you go. Yeah, now you can ask. Go ahead.
That was my mistake. Thank you.
Yeah.
So God does not have correct and not right?
Yeah, this is the end of the verse. Look at it, verse 6. God does not guide the wicked people. They're already wicked, so He does not guide.
We can assume that hypocrites cannot.
Yes, they can, because this is our free decision.
Then who's going to accept the repentance?
God will accept the repentance. The minute they change the decision to believers, they are believers. Not as long as they're hypocrites or disbelievers. Only when they make a decision to believe. Right. As soon as they make a decision to believe, they step into God's kingdom. Right. As long as they're hypocrites and disbelievers, they're outside of God's circle. Douglas.
In these verses, God is revealing to us some of the inequalities of hypocrites. He's revealing to us what otherwise we wouldn't know. We couldn't see. They are liars. They cannot understand. They do not know. God is revealing to us what otherwise we may not be able to see.
We still don't see.
Exactly. Right, we don't see.
God sees.
Formed by this.
God says, I know them, you don't know them.
Right. The other point I wanted to make in explanation, when he uses example of wood logs, does this mean, for example, like wood floating in water, its own surface?
No.
I'm just asking hollow logs, something that appears to be a circle.
No. Can you communicate with a wooden log?
Okay, yeah.
He does it all the time.
In fact, there's an Egyptian proverb and an English proverb. So they're standing there like a log. This in English? Turkey, yes. And in Arabic too. In English, I mean. In Egyptians. Did we finish Surah 63? Okay, go ahead, finish.
Verse 9, O you who believe, do not be distracted by your business and your children from the commemoration of God. Those who do this are losers. And spend in charity from what we provide for you, before death comes to the one of you, and then say, My Lord, if you postpone this for a short while, I'll be charitable and righteous. God never postpones the end for any soul once the predetermined time has come. God is cognizant of everything you do. The easiest thing in the world to do is to be distracted by those that we care about the most. And God warns us against that. In other verses says that these may be enemies of ours, and we do need to be cautious of that and avoid idolatry. Spending in charity is so easy if we know that nothing we have came from us or will go with us anywhere. It comes from God, it's not ours to start with, and if we give it in charity, we give it only where it was meant to go. Verse 11 says, God never postpones the end for any soul, and once the time comes, it's come, and there's nothing more that you can do after the day of resurrection. But there is so much mercy from God, and we have so many chances before that day. So many. They're limitless. As long as we live, we have a chance, an opportunity. God constantly provides those opportunities for the hypocrites to repent, for us to continue to work right up until the last moment. That verse 11 sounds very final. But when we know the mercy of God and what He provides for us on a minute-to-minute, second-to-second basis in this world, it's extraordinary. And it doesn't need to frighten us. We just need to know that there is a limit. And once we've reached it, it's over. We have no more to do. Any other comments and questions?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, let's thank Catherine for an excellent Quranic study.
I can go up to 114 in 10 minutes. You said you wanted me to do it.
And then we'll get to general questions. Farhan.
Many different
And everything God said. Excuse me.
The number of times that the subject of the law is being mentioned, is that
That's a good sign, yeah. But all of them are important. All the laws are important. So I want to go back to the Friday business. Remember that the title of the surah is named after prayer. Friday. And there's a surah in the Quran entitled Friday. And the commandment is there saying, O you who believe, when the Salat prayers announced on Friday, go and drop all business. This is the commandment. All the commandments of God are important.
is more important than any other.
But this is the basic requirement.
Yeah, that's
I mean, it's not there, so nothing else exists. Everything else will be in vain. I mean, a person can be truthful and honest and is a very nice person, but he does not believe in God. All his work is in vain. So, La ilaha illallah goes without saying. Then after that, all the commandments are very important. Every single one of them.
For example, can you say Salat is more important than Zakat?
No.
Because it's mentioned more than...
Actually, they are both usually mentioned together. Salat and Zakat.
Or fasting.
Fasting is very important. You're disobeying God if you don't fast. You're disobeying God if you don't do the Zakat. You're disobeying God if you don't do the prayer. You're disobeying God if you lie or cheat. So, take your pick. It's very expensive if you...
But also, like, I think it's important to say that God's not so strict that you have to do it. God always gives us, for people who can't do it, gives us alternatives.
Well, it's our choice, You can put your finger in the fire or not. It's up to you. I mean, God left it up to us. You heard Jahan today. If he doesn't want to do the push-ups, he will think that God is doing everything, not him. So it's as simple as that. We're celebrating Layla's birthday today. I don't mean to embarrass you. But her birthday was the 19th of March. Is that so? And she didn't even know that her address was the multiple 19. So this is why she came to Tucson. Celebrate her birthday with us. There are so many things that we need to do. We read Al-Fatiha for Su'ad, remember? Because of her tests. Well, she passed. But there's another big test coming up. And she's greedy again, and she wants us to recite Al-Fatiha for her. God never turns us down. And Ahmed needs that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help him with his PhD exam this Monday.
Okay, do it for me too.
Yes, of course.
Next month.
Yes, you better ask. God is generous. And we have a perfect record so far, alhamdulillah. God never turned us down. Strange things we asked for, and He never turned us down. We even overturned governments. We did that. What else? You're supposed to remind me. Who else asked for Al-Fatiha? Huh? Yes, we said Al-Fatiha for Linda Baroni because she had some infection in the hospital. She's all right. We want to take advantage of Jahan's presence, so he'll be our teacher next week. So he wants to go AWOL. Serious? What are you leaving? Which Monday? This Monday? Should we go? This Monday? Well, let's read the Fatiha so he stays. Okay? Okay, so let us recite Al-Fatiha and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give Layla a happy year coming up. Every year to be happier than the previous year. And we're going to recite also Al-Fatiha for Su'ad, for her coming test. And for Ahmed Rayan. And Al-Fatiha to keep John here in Tulsa for a while, at least a few weeks, at least. And as you recite Al-Fatiha, turn to God and ask Him for your own personal wishes, anything you want. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Malik Yawm al-Din. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Congratulations, you special people. Yes, of course. Was I supposed to?
وكأسا دهاقا لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا كذابا جزاء من ربك عطاء حسابا رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما الرحمن لا يملكون منه خطابا يوم يقوم الروح والملائكة صفا لا يتكلمون إلا من أذن له الرحمن وقال صوابا ذلك اليوم الحق فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه مآبا إنا أنذرناكم عذابا قريبا يوم ينظر المرء ما قدمت يداه ويقول الكافر يا ليتني كنت ترابا